Hello. Today I'm going to be discussing making a Viking cap. And in case you're curious, the picture at the bottom of your screen is my daughter wearing the first Viking cap that I ever made. But before we get too involved in Viking caps, make sure to like the video and click subscribe to stay updated when future videos come out. Our information about Vikings are limited based on what we can find from grave sites and such. So based on that, who would wear a Viking cap or hood? From what we know, unmarried girls wore their hair loose. For special occasions, they could pull their hair back in a circlet, a fillet, or a cranson, and possibly wear their hair in braids. An example of a cranson would be the picture on the left. If you've seen How to Train Your Dragon, then you know who Astrid is. And cranson, it's roughly translated as a head wreath, which was passed down from mother to daughter. Head coverings, we believe, were usually worn by married women. Based on the Osberg ship burial, the head covering could have been something as simple as a knotted kerchief over the head. However, like I said, we believe head coverings were only worn by women, but some of the caps found have not been at grave sites, so we don't know for sure if the hoods were worn by only women or if men wore them as well. The following two caps to be discussed were found in Western Scandinavia in the Norway, Iceland, British Isles area. And there are two variations of the Viking cap. The first cap to be talked about today is the Jorvik cap, and then later will be the Dublin cap. These caps are also known as hoods, so don't be surprised if I interchange the two names. The main difference to think about is even though these are referred to as Viking hoods or Viking caps, either way, they hug the head rather than what you may think of with a typical Viking hood that includes something that covers the shoulders. This is head covering only. These caps are similar to coifs, so if you know anything about medieval coifs, this is a similar setup to that. The main difference is the materials that were used, the cut around the face, and where the ties are located. And pictured to the right are two examples of the Jorvik caps, and on the far right is a silk cap that is at the York Museum from roughly about 900 to 950 AD. The Jorvik hood was square-shaped with a rounded back, so imagine just taking a square and then cutting off the back corner and sewing it up so that it's rounded over the back of the head. 3 caps made of silk were found in Jorvik, which is York. The silk was probably undyed and locally woven. It's believed that this style of hood had linen ties on it based on one of the hoods found at the Coppergate digs, because that hood had linen ties on it. And if you notice on the picture on the left, the linen ties, the ties are not at the bottom corner. They're actually about an inch or two above the bottom corner, just because the hood is long enough that the ties would be right about here underneath the chin rather than right underneath the chin. The cap that was found at the Coppergate digs was 8 inches deep, so imagine going from around the face by the eyeballs and then going back to the back of the head, so 8 inches back, and then 24 inches long. So go from one side of the head up and over the head to the other side of the head, so 24 inches long that way. And then there was a back seam sewn up, and then the edges were finished. The center back seam ran along the straight grain for approximately 6 3/4 inches from the bottom edge. So that's going from the bottom edge up to the top of the head for a little less than 7 inches. The curve over the back of the head ended up with a flattened tapering dart about 2 inches from the front, from the top edge. The edges of the seams had neat, tiny double hems that were approximately 0.06 of an inch wide. They were rolled, so just imagine taking the fabric and just gently rolling it a bit, so that way it's doubled over so it won't fray, and then stitching it up. So that's a very tiny hem. And the hems were also hemmed from left to right. On the right-hand side is a picture diagram to show you what the cap would have looked like as laying flat as a long rectangle, folding it in half, and then removing the corners so it's more curved for the back of the head. To the left is a picture from the textiles, cordage, and raw fiber from the 16 to 22 Coppergate, and that's by Penelope Walton. And the selvage edge of the fabric was used on the edge around the face, so the selvage edge would be, again, the edge around the face. The Jorvik hoods were typically longer than the London hoods, with the ties higher up on the front edge. Remember a couple screens ago where I said it wasn't at the bottom corner, but a couple inches above the bottom corner? That's this part. The ties could be tied behind the ears. For comfort, think of if you were to wear a bandana, sort of like a headband, and then tie it around at the bottom part of your, the nape of your neck. But that, by tying it behind the ears, it won't be as secure on your head as it would be if you tied it underneath your chin. We don't know for sure exactly how they wore it, which way they wore it tied, and being an anachronist in the SCA, I've seen it done both ways. Now, with the Dublin hood, unlike the Jorvik hood that could be made from silk, the Dublin hoods were mostly made from wool. 4 of them were found in silk, but at least 12 have been found in wool. The Dublin hoods were typically smaller than the Jorvik hoods. Remember where the Jorvik hood went down further so that the ties were underneath the chin, and then there was extra fabric, about an inch or two of fabric underneath the ties? This has the ties that end right at the corner. And these hoods were made from a rectangle of fabric with the points sticking out of the back of the head. So instead of rounding off the back and having a curve around the back of your head, you instead have a point at the back of your head. These rectangles were approximately 19 inches long before sewing up the back seam. So again, going from, think of like the bottom of one earlobe up and over your head to the bottom of the other earlobe, and about 6 3/4 of an inch wide. So where the Jorvik hood was 8 inches wide from the seam around the face, from the edge going around the face to the back seam, this one, instead of 8 inches, was only 6 3/4 of an inch going back. The bottom of the hood should reach just below your ears, so right underneath the earlobes. And unlike the Jorvik hood, the ties on the Dublin hood, again, they were at the bottom corner edge. Could any other fabrics be used besides wool and silk? It is possible that linen may have been used, and simply the physical evidence of it has faded away with time. In a lot of the grave sites, there has been very little linen found. What linen has been found was usually underneath, say, a brooch or something metallic that kept that little piece of linen, helped it survive to today. So it is possible that linen may have been used and it's just disappeared over time. But again, being an anachronist in the SCA, I have seen plenty of linen hoods. So feel free to use linen if you so choose. What colors were available? If you are doing silk, the silk caps were probably made from undyed silk. However, if you prefer to dye your silk, the following dye stuffs were used to dye silks during the Viking Age. And on the left-hand side of your screen, you will see different suggestions for dyeing, such as madder, indigo, and weld. And if you're using wool, wool was naturally available in various shades of white, gray, and brown. However, again, if you wish to dye your wool, the following dyes were available to dye wool during the Viking Age. And again, that includes madder, English walnut, woad, and the list is on the right side of your screen. For sewing the hood, to reinforce the edge of the fabric, certain stitches were used, like the singling stitch or the stick stitch, as seen on the left-hand side of the screen. And to reinforce any exposed edges of fabric, an overcasted whip stitch was used as pictured on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, should you use beeswax? Although there is no surviving evidence to say for certain that beeswax was used on their threads, there were balls of beeswax found at the Coppergate digs and in some ship burials from this time period. Therefore, it stands to reason that they could have hypothetically used beeswax on their threads, and any trace evidence has simply faded away over the last 10 centuries. Having done embroidery and other hand stitching and such, I can tell you that using beeswax, at least on the ends of your threads, helps it not to fray. So for me, I think it makes sense that they may have used beeswax just to add that extra layer of security to their threads and make sure it didn't fray or anything like that. How to make the ties. Only a few caps found had ties. 10 out of 20 caps were too deteriorated to say for certain if they even originally had ties. 2 of the caps found at Dublin had decorative edging cord, so it is possible that the same cord that was used for the decorative edging may have also been used for the ties on those hoods, and the ties have just disappeared over the last 10 centuries. In the Birka grave number 466, it lists a braided cord, which how it's described sounds a lot like a lucette cord based on the description. Some of the other Birka graves with braids or cords are listed in graves 465, 954, and 973. On the left-hand side of your screen, you will see different types of braiding and cording that did exist during the Viking Age, which includes plied cords, finger loop braids, lucette cords, and the 3-strand braid. Since we don't know for sure if all of the Viking caps had ties or exactly what ties they had or how those ties were made, as an anachronist, I would think that any of these braids on the left-hand side would be acceptable for making ties for your Viking headgear. And here's just a works cited page if you'd like to know more information on anything given today. As I mentioned at the beginning of my video, I had made this Viking cap for my daughter. It was the first one that I made. And let's see if the camera will zoom in there. And I learned some things from it, and with that, that's why I decided to make this video. First off, you see I did lucette cords here at the bottom. But if you notice, I have them going this way, so they're hanging down. But if you notice, well, a few things. One, I made this to look like a Dublin hood with the strings going down from the corner. But if you look, I've got it rounded like a Jorvik hood. If you also notice, if I can zoom in here, I used linen. Another thing I did that I learned the hard way, if the camera will let me zoom in here, I put my seam up the back, which actually was correct, so I did do something right, but also on the top here, see if the camera will show me, or let me show it, but my dart, probably just see it from here, my dart actually goes here, but from the evidence, it should have been about here, not here. So about I believe it's 2 3/4 of an inch back is where the dart should have been, and then start the rounding part over the head. But for my first attempt, not too horrible. The other thing being that it's a mishmash between the Jorvik and the Dublin hood. Like I said, it's got the ties on the corners like the Dublin hood, but because it's the Jorvik style, this should be longer, but I also made it for my daughter, which she has a smaller head, so this actually looks longer on her head. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask and subscribe.